If you were active on the internet in the early to mid 2010s, you for sure were familiar with creepypastas, short internet horror stories made to spook the pants off of any 12-year-old reading in the middle of the night. We all know the classics: Jeff the Killer, The Slender Man, Russian Sleep Experiment, Username 666. These stories were a big part of my childhood growing up, for better and for worse. As a young kid, I remember genuinely being scared of these things, to the extent that older kids would actively make stuff up about them to scare me. I can vividly recall some teen making up that trees with thorns on them were a sign of the Slender Man right as the sun was starting to set, which made me bolt out of the forest, scared for my life. Though nowadays, these stories obviously don't faze me in the slightest. Look, I can refresh YouTube's 666 page all I want, there's not a lick of piss in my pants about it! The early 2010s were also a time of deep gaming nostalgia. NES, SNES, Game Boy, Genesis, all consoles with games people started to look back on fondly. Old fans remembered how much they loved these titles, and new fans were getting into them, in part due to the rise of emulation and the Wii's Virtual Console. Combine that, and this, and hey, what do you know, a match made in HE double gun! As a young fan of gaming during that era, I had a lot of fun with video game creepypastas. So let's take the express train back 10 years, and mercilessly make fun of stories written by preteens on their mom's laptop, and point out stories that are genuinely quite impressive and deserve some praise. The year is 2010. Apple's new iPad is on store shelves, Kesha released one of the best pop albums of all time, and a man by the name of Alex Hall is about to share his experiences of a haunted copy of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask on 4chan, which would eventually go on to be called Ben Drowned. In case you haven't read it, it follows a fictionalized version of Hall, going by the screen name Judiciable, as he plays through his copy of Majora's Mask and realizes, what do you know, the cartridge is haunted, ooh, spooky. Essentially, this ghost or demon, possibly named Ben, torments him, fucks with the game, gets into his computer, typical haunted item deal. Honestly, as a story, it's just alright. Nothing too special, and I do have some problems with it, like the whole Cleverbot thing feeling kinda weird and not really adding much to the story. Despite that, Ben Drowned would go on to be one of, if not the most influential internet horror story ever, credited for popularizing the whole haunted game genre of creepypasta, something we're going to see a lot of going forward. Not only that, but this story has something that a lot of modern stories don't even have, much less others at the time: video. Using Project 64 and some Game Shark codes, Hall was able to create the effects of his story in an actual ROM of Majora's Mask, which he would add to each story update to increase believability. We'll see a lot more examples of supplementary material for creepypastas in a minute, but having essentially video evidence for a fictional story added this sense of realism and grounding to the tale. It's as if we could actually get a glimpse at how Ben is affecting the game. ROM hacking and Game Shark codes weren't anything new then and are especially prevalent nowadays, but these are all so well done that they really pulled me in and almost made me forget that none of this is real. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the continuations of the story Hall has put out, but for this video I really only focused on the first part because that's what's most popular and impacted the online space the most. Maybe one day we can talk about the other two parts, but for now I'd highly recommend reading the first, as the mix of text and video storytelling is really unique for these stories. Also, the end of the first part mentions that you shouldn't download any of Judicible's videos from the story out of fear of Ben spreading to other desktops, so you probably shouldn't do that. Hey, listen, it's okay for me to do it. I need background footage. I'm sure nothing bad's gonna happen. Moving on from one story about a creepy haunted game to another, Godzilla NES! Written by Cosby Daft, this is a 2011 story about the NES game Godzilla Monster of Monsters, and if you've ever heard of it, you've probably heard that it's very long. How long exactly? Yeah, I'm not reading all of that, at least for the purposes of this video. I'm sure the writing is great, don't get me wrong, but it's pretty repetitive, and if I'm being honest, I don't have the time or attention span to read the equivalent of over half of The Great Gatsby before this video's deadline. I did, however, re-listen to the synopsis by Billy Styler, link in the description, who does a great job keeping in all of the important details while making the story ingestible in a single sitting. Essentially, our protagonist Zack gets a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters for the NES, and while playing it, spooky glitch-like things start occurring, eventually escalating to new creatures and events appearing within the game, similar to Ben Drowned. Most notable of these creatures is Red. This fucking thing that looks like the Fiji mermaid was 20% more fucked up. That would make a pretty cool Godzilla antagonist, I'll give it that. The sprite art throughout the entire story is really impressively done. It would be easy to just rip a somewhat creepy 8-bit sprite from another game, or just use the monster that already exists within Godzilla NES, but Cosby Daft is a sprite artist, and used their skills to create a genuinely unsettling design for the story's antagonist. Eventually, the game starts referring to Zack specifically, and an event from his past where his girlfriend Melissa had a mental episode, causing her to run into traffic and cut her own life short. The final world is totally corrupt, ending with a fight with Red where he explains that he is the manifestation of the sickness that caused Melissa to get her neck acquainted with the road, and then proceeds to just totally wreck Zack. Eventually, Melissa reveals that she's in the game too, and has been tormented by Red since her death, gifting Zack with a new character to absolutely tear Red to bits and free Melissa from her torment. Melissa says their goodbyes, and Zack finally gets closure on this tragic part of his life. And then Zack decides to sell his cartridge on eBay. What a Yeah, most of the criticism of the story lies in its ending. Some people dislike the fact that Melissa's in the game and just gives Zack a super powerful character at the very end, and while I do understand that, it's exactly how I felt 3 years ago, judging by this old comment. My biggest issue derives from the fact that, during the fight, Zack can feel the pain that Red inflicts onto the monsters Zack plays as, and that he physically cannot set the controller down. Like, man, you don't need to come up with an excuse for playing through to the end. We've all been hit by the sunk cost fallacy before. Jokes aside, I think the story would have worked better if it leaned more into being an allegory for Zack overcoming his grief, rather than something so supernatural that it causes Zack to feel the actual pain of the pixelated monsters he controls as. Sure, physical pain can be a good allegory for emotional pain, but I think the way it's done here undermines Zack's feelings in exchange for trying to sell Red as this real, all-powerful demon. I think it would also make the Melissa reveal more poignant, because it could better represent Zack using the good memories he had of his girlfriend to give him the strength to move on, which I do think was the intention. Despite my criticisms, this is honestly one of the best-made creepypastas I've ever heard of. The story is simple, yet captivating, and the images included really help add that sense of believability to it all. Sure, the story is a bit lengthy and repetitive, but it's definitely a story worth checking out. Just, Zack, buddy, stop selling your haunted cartridges with the soul of your girlfriend on eBay. There are better ways to set up sequels. Of course, we can't talk about haunted games without bringing up, sonic.exe. We've all heard of it, we all know about it. Kid gets game from friend who tells him to destroy it. Kid puts it into computer because he has no functional brain cells. Sonic is scary, yada yada yada. This story sucks ass. Terrible writing, boring premise, the protagonist is hilariously stupid and over the top, even for a kid. This reads more like a bad parody than a genuine attempt to scare people. Sonic.exe is infamously a terrible creepypasta, but much like the original Blue Blur, it exploded in popularity, regardless of quality. Seriously, in terms of creepypastas about video games, Sonic.exe is far and away the most popular online. Just go onto DeviantArt and look up Sonic.exe with the content filter on, and you will see almost 50,000 pieces made just for this character. It's clear that the character made an impact on a lot of people, especially after the Sonic.exe fan game made by Mr. Crimson, and there is some value to that. I'm sure there's a lot of young artists and programmers that got their start or popularity from this character. I mean, it sure launched the original creator into popularity. Popular enough to start inappropriately messaging minors, whoops! Moving on from a garbage fire Sonic creepypasta to a garbage no fire creepypasta featuring his longtime rival Mario, it's Mario! Real creative name there. In this story, our protagonist Adam browses the hacks waiting to be moderated section of Super Mario World Central, a website for ROM hacks of Super Mario World, and finds a hack simply titled Mario. And then, like, spooky stuff happens in it. I don't know, the only interesting parts of the story are how the author goes on and on about how much the idea of Mario being evil makes them want to shit their pants. Seriously, this guy will not shut the fuck up about how disturbing the idea of Mario killing people is, so much so that it would genuinely make me laugh every time they mentioned it. Listen, I grew up during the 2010s. Seeing Mario do something fucked up was an average Tuesday for internet users back then. This tale isn't known for the story itself, however. It's known not only for the fact that there's an actual IPS patch you can download and play, which, credit where it's due, it's a lot of effort and adds to the sense of believability, much like Ben Drowned, but also for the text document that comes with it, able to be converted into a JPEG to make this image. This, added with the part of the hack that details an alleged crime report about a murder victim without her eyes, made people believe that it might be real, and that this was actually a photo of said victim. Of course it wasn't, you silly goose. It's a heavily edited photo of this woman, which wasn't actually found until last year. And if that's all you know of the story, then don't even bother reading the original creepypasta, unless you're looking to have a laugh with some buds, because it's really not that good. On the topic of creepypastas about immensely popular Nintendo properties, Pokémon is the highest grossing media franchise of all time. How many creepypastas are there of those games? How many are there of value? This is an IOU. I kid, but yeah, there are a lot of Pokemon creepypastas out there. So many that the Creepypasta Wiki has its own dedicated page for them. I remember a ton of them from my childhood. Buried Alive, White Hand, Hypno's Lullaby, Creepy Black, Love I Won, Lost Silver, but the most popular, and best in my opinion, is Lavender Town Syndrome. For the uninitiated, this story claims that in the Japanese versions of Pokemon Red and Green, the music used for Lavender Town had a higher tone that would give kids massive headaches, and even have terrible side effects, leading to the kids taking their own lives, a story heavily covered up by Nintendo. While I don't like that last bit, as it's so obviously verifiably wrong, That sort of adds to the charm of it, and I do remember actually believing that the original releases had higher pitched music that could cause adverse side effects, so much so that I'd get scared walking into Lavender Town on my own American title of Pokemon Red, always getting on my bike to avoid hearing the tune. I have a vivid memory of sitting on my couch, thinking that I could hear the music playing in my head, trying to drive me insane. I was kind of a dumb kid. Obviously, none of the tones that the Game Boy could create could actually make you go insane. At most, it could just cause mild headaches. And the part about the Japanese versions having higher pitched music straight up is not true, no matter how many goddamn YouTube uploads there are. Of course, I genuinely believed this for the longest time, as I had no way of accessing the Japanese versions of those games. Do you think 10-year-old Hutch knew what the fucking emulator was? If you want to hear something really scary, just listen to this beta version of Lavender Town. Psych! This isn't real either! I keep seeing these floating around YouTube, but there is no public beta for Pocket Monsters Red and Green, or any version of the Gen 1 games. I'd love to know who made this alleged beta version of the tune, that all these descriptions keep saying is actually the version that caused those kids to kill themselves, I swear! But I can't find that information anywhere. The only thing I can find is this open Reddit post asking the same thing. And the responses are less than useful. Another Poképasta, as they call it, and one that I think a lot of people overlook, is called Strangled Red. It tells the story of a hacked version of Red, where the in-game protagonist of the game, named Steven, becomes a champion with the help of his beloved Charizard Miki. When he goes to trade Miki over to his brother to help him complete the Pokedex, an error occurs, and Miki fucking dies! Cut to a year later, and Steven has totally let himself go, and eventually heads back from Lavender Town, of course, to his home in Pallet Town, goes up to his brother, and oh hey, that's where the title comes from. The story isn't perfect, but I really liked it for its moderate realism. It's just a story about a hacked Pokemon game. It doesn't affect anything in the real world. The author is scared, of course, but he's not like, and then I could actually feel the pain that Steven felt in that moment or some bullshit like that. It's just a person going through a game, and I really like that. Check this one out if you haven't. It's actually pretty good. Pokemon is a game series I have a lot of nostalgia for. But you know what game I have even more nostalgia for? You all know where this is going. Herobrine, the deity every Minecraft fan was obsessed with at one point or another, just so happens to be my favorite creepypasta of all time. The original post is not the most in-depth story, just telling about an unknown entity with the default player skin, but with all white eyes, messing with an anonymous 4chan user in-game and on the Minecraft forums. During Minecraft's alpha, beta, and even early release days, players didn't know much about the game. There were no in-depth release notes or snapshots, updates came out somewhat randomly, and oftentimes it was up to the player to figure out what had been changed. Coupled with the fact that old Minecraft is genuinely kinda eerie sometimes, with the Resident Evil-esque fog and sense of isolation, and the idea of a secret entity that messes with the player was actually believable, especially after the devs started to play along with it. But there's something about Herobrine that people only realized recently. As it would turn out, the character was directly inspired by another creepypasta by Endorphin, known as White Eyes. It's hardly even a creepypasta, it's just an exaggerated explanation of something players noticed in the game, a bug causing little white pixels to appear in the darkness, which people thought looked like eyes. The phenomenon inspired YouTube user Kerchak to upload a recording of the music disc 13, which is linked in the original creepypasta, with this image accompanying it. What seems like just a dark cave actually has a pair of glowing white eyes in the bottom left corner. I played Minecraft Alpha 1.0.16 for this video, which is the version the iconic screenshot comes from, and yeah, old Minecraft is very unsettling. It perfectly encapsulates the fear of not being truly alone, thinking that something or someone might be right around the corner. I felt paranoid the entire time. I would see things that weren't there. Chickens would take fall damage, which they should not be doing. That freaked me out more than I'd like to admit. I got jump scared by a cow. I know I'm a huge wuss that can barely handle horror, but I 100% understand how Herobrine was created and why people would believe in him. I love the Herobrine creepypasta. I was all over it as a kid, always wanting to find him or find evidence online of him, making up storylines in my head about him, and Entity 303, please don't make me get into that. Scaring my little brother by joining his Pocket Edition world as Herobrine. The character weirdly embodies that warm, nostalgic early Minecraft feeling. Yeah, I'll admit it, I mostly like this one out of nostalgia, but I do genuinely think it was made at the perfect time. As I said, old Minecraft had this eerie feeling of being alone in the world, and the only thing scarier than feeling alone is feeling like you're not. There are tons of stories I wish I could go into deeper. Misfortune.gb is a really short and sweet story about a demonic game causing bad things to happen, sort of like an old folk legend brought into the modern day. JVK1166Z.ESP is a captivating tale about someone pretty naturally going insane from a fucked up Morrowind mod. The Maze is a story attempting to give context to the oldest survival horror game ever made, 3D Monster Maze. The list of interesting creepypastas goes on and on, but I want to wrap this up with a super unique, hardly even creepypasta to be honest, that brought video game horror stories back into the spotlight. Every copy of Mario 64 is personalized. Basically, people started saying that Super Mario 64 had an advanced AI in it that personalized the game to the player's liking, leading to each person having a different, unique playthrough of the game compared to everyone else. This was a community effort of people posting their own stories, hacks, images, footage, whatever they could of their own personalized copies of Mario 64. Some as crazy as giant Wario heads flying around their game, some as small as just random unnoticeable added objects or effects. Mario 64 is another game that feels eerie and empty to play in, so it's no surprise that people took the idea of something wrong happening in the game and ran with it. While I wish I could say this led to a video game creepypasta renaissance, it did, for a moment, remind people that these stories exist and can be worth exploring. Well, this and... one other thing that brought old creepypastas back into the spotlight that we will not talk about here. I've been pretty critical of a lot of stories here, and yeah, like the title says, pretty much all of these are a little stupid. They don't really work well as horror stories, are easy to pick apart, and are either super contrived or just lead you to asking, why didn't you just turn off the game? But I don't really care about that. I love video game creepypastas because sometimes it's nice to just turn off your brain and believe there's a more sinister side to the things you love. Plus, most of these stories are probably just written by kids who are flexing their creative muscles by making stories about things they're passionate about. I would never discourage that. The world needs more real human-made creativity nowadays. Now, what I don't need are any more of these freaky Link statues cluttering up the place. I guess I could just put you guys in my closet until I find somewhere to get rid of you.
Jack-o'-lantern.